right, so all you new people, let me just open up by saying I am not indicative of the general population of Alcoholics Anonymous. I go to meetings where they say, we would like you to refrain from use of profanity, and I sit in my chair and go, oh yeah, because that's how I operate. But I will tell you that I'm not going to really give you much of an opinion. I'm going to talk about things that are in the text of my personal experience with the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, so that's what we're going to talk about. The real shit. The real deal. So let me tell you why I wasn't here last week. It's a really funny story. It's super enlightening. So my mother-in-law died. Okay, so there's that. That happened. And then I went to Texas. And oh my God, it was a shit show. The first thing that happened was I had to find the damn body because she had dementia and she was in a facility and they wanted the bed, so they told the people that she had no next to kin, so they warehoused her in some like random ass freezer in Dallas, and it took me like 3 days to find her, so I found her. But let me just say this, from the Perry Street group, that's my favorite meeting, is the Perry Street group. The Saturday night speaker meeting is awesome. I love that meeting.
We're having a dinosaur meeting.
Are you really? Now, is it a dinosaur or dinosaur junior meeting? Okay. The other part was a punk rock reference for those of you, all right? Just so you know. Yeah, it's all right. Well, TSOL is playing in 2 weeks, and everybody in that band is sober, and I just fucking fucked up their anonymity, just so you know. So, don't tell anybody, but go to the show anyway. All right, so I went to Dallas, right, and it was horrible, right? And then I found the body, and so my brother-in-law is an active alcoholic and a workaholic, and he's one of those guys that gets a lot of money like really quick and then starts to just destroy his life, and 4 years into it runs off to a different state. You know, those guys are like always ahead of the curve. That's that guy. So he's been estranged from the rest of the family for, I don't know, like 10, 12 years. So and my mother-in-law, I loved her dearly. We were really, really close. However, the last time I saw her dementia had acted up a little bit. And when I was leaving with her daughter from her room, she grabbed me by the arm and looked at me and said, "You stole my daughter, you effing kike." And I'm like, whoa, okay, maybe we should back this up because that's a little intense. But that's another story. So this guy's missing. And here's the thing about Texas. You cannot cremate a body unless all the heirs sign, because then you can't exhume it and there's a problem. So I had to reach way back into my old life nefarious Rolodex that I possessed and reach out to a couple fellas to track down this guy, and we found him. So the entire time I'm having this discussion at the Brown Family Crematory in Fort Worth, Texas, with a guy who's the head creamerer, or whatever those guys are called, the burner-upper of dead people, apparently that's his official title, and he walks in and he looks like Johnny Cash. He's got a black shirt with silver tips on his collar, got black pants, got a giant-ass belt buckle, pure silver, black boots, and silver tips. We sit down, we start chit-chatting while my wife is crying or something, and it turns out that he used to like methamphetamine a lot, and then he started drinking, and he just recently got sober 2 years ago. So we started talking about sobriety. And he hands me his card. And his name is Dusty Pyle. I shit you not. His given name is Dusty L. Pyle, head burner-upper of people at the Brown Family Crematory. And he told me his entire story because we had a date, and when my wife went to dinner with her dad, we went to a meeting in Fort Worth. So all this craziness was culminated by me realizing what a sense of humor God has, and how ironic life is, and how ironic death can be, because it's the uber-natural reality to a conclusion of life, right? We started last week, or 2 weeks ago, with step 6, and the very first line says what separates the men from the boys in the 12 and 12. And it's that idea of striving for perfection, right? We strive for perfection hopefully as adults, knowing that we will never attain it until the moment of our death and transcendence from the mortal coil. Whereas children strive for perfection in the hopes that they can get it, and when they don't, they're crushed. Right? And so now we move into step 7 this week, which is my favorite step. Those of you who have been here before know that I say that every week. And this morning I actually spoke on the 11th tradition, because that's my favorite tradition. Like all of them, basically. Actually, I really do like the 11th tradition, because it's one of those random traditions where you think that it's got nothing to do with you as a human being, right? Because it says we maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film. Like, what the hell does that mean? Well, it means this. What is my press? What are people saying about me? What is my radio? What am I saying about them? Am I shit-talking them? Am I character assassinating? And what is my film? How is my life? Do I walk the walk instead of just talk the talk? So if my press is good, and my radio is good, and my film is good, I'm probably sober AF, just saying. Mic drop. I know, I wouldn't do it to you. The nice mic. Okay, so let's talk about the 7th step. And the 7th step is my favorite step, because it literally has no direction at all in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. On page 76, step 6 and step 7 are 2 paragraphs. In fact, one's a half a paragraph and the other one's a random prayer with no direction whatsoever. Step 6 says, we emphasize willingness as being indispensable. Yeah, well, that's not direction, because all the steps, willingness is indispensable. That's why that shit's on the back of the coin. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, page 576. These are indispensable for all the steps. Thank you. There's one sentence of direction for step 6. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things we now believe are objectionable? We talked about this last week. What's your job? What's your job in step 6? Come on, you got a beard. It's awesome. Wrong answer. No, you're good. There's only 2 types of men. Those with beards and women, just so you know. Me and you, simpatico, bro. So our job is to find those things objectionable, right? Like, that's the hardest thing. I have tons of slightly defective manifestations of character that I like, and I don't want to let them go. And we spent 2 weeks ago talking about all that, right? There are certain reasons. And I would suggest this, even though it is not conference-approved literature, to any of you that really want to engage in the depth and weight of Step 6 and 7, to read Drop the Rock and Ripples, which is the 2nd edition of Drop the Rock. 2 books by Hazelden Publishing Company, not conference-approved literature, but they are, in fact, awesome, and you should probably read them. In fact, Drop the Rock is one of the 4 non-conference approved literatures that the General Service Conference says that you can study in an AA meeting and still call it an AA meeting. There's 4, right? Drop the Rock, 24 Hours a Day, which is also a Hazelden book, Back to Basics, and another one that I can't remember. What is it? They haven't gotten riffles yet, and it's ruffles that have ridges or something like that. I'm not even sure. So let's get back to this idea. So this is what's crazy about this stuff. Okay, so there is absolutely no direction at all, right? It says this: my Creator, I am now ready for you to have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way for my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. That's the entire step. The very next sentence says, what? Anybody know? We have then completed step 7. That's it. No direction, no nothing, just throw a prayer at you. So, this is very interesting, because when we open the 12 and 12, there is copious amounts written about humility. The entire premise of this step is about humility. And my sponsor drove that shit into my brain. And I said, I don't know humility. I get humiliated all the time. And he's like, well, yeah, that's Jesus humbling you. I said, great, but I'm Jewish. He goes, doesn't matter. The universe has a sense of humor. This is absolutely unequivocally the truth. The irony is when I can recognize that me being the butt of a joke and not feeling butt hurt about that joke. That's what spiritual development's about, right? My ability to recognize forced humility that can transcend into a sense of desire to become more humble. And this is why this step is my favorite, and I also hate it simultaneously, because there's so much written about humility. The minute I start talking about that shit, I can guarantee you I have none. It's just a catch-22, right? It's one of those things that, it's like the idea of God, right? You know, when we talk about divinity, we actually reduce the intensity of it because of our inability to have concepts beyond conceptibility, right? You know, it's so crazy. There's a line in the Zohar, which is the mystical text of Judaism, and it's commentary on the very first line of the Bible in Hebrew. The Hebrew text says, "Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz," which in the KJV is translated as, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." If you literally translate it, it says, "From the beginning, it creates God, heaven and earth." And what is it? The ineffable that we can't even start to grasp. So it has to reduce itself to my monkey meat sack brain capacity to allow me to even start to approach those concepts. And that's the hardest part of step 7. For me, that humility is incredibly difficult to talk about because it diminishes it solely by the verbiage, right? And it makes me crazy at times, but it also allows me to grow from the tension, right? The tension is the key to this entire thing. So we talked 2 weeks ago about defects, right? And I said that a defect inherently is revealed in step 5 because the revelation makes it no longer a defect. Because defects, things that are defective, are either broken beyond repair or it's shit that I'm unaware of. But once I become aware of it, it no longer is a defect. If I want to be a better man, it has to be a shortcoming. And remember, I talked to you 2 weeks ago about this idea of being a better man. I want to be the man I can be. I can't practice being that guy. That guy doesn't exist. Why are 6 and 7 focused on defects and shortcomings? Because the best I can do is not be the asshole that I was. And in doing that, I allow myself to be guided by the universe and evolve into the man I can be. Practicing being the man I want to be is just another way of not living life on life's terms. It's me projecting and chasing a ghost, a specter. But if I work on rectifying my shortcomings, the areas that I come up short because I desire to be that better man, I keep them focused in the forefront of my brain, and I ask the universe to help me in the removal of those, which actually allows me to think of them, become aware and cogent in the moment, and not like it. That reinforces that it's objectionable to me, and I stop doing it because I don't like it. It's a cycle, right? People always ask me, because I happen to be a theologian, did God create man or did man create God? My personal theology, and this may be the only opinion I give you all night, is that God created man to create God. Right? And it's the same with 6 and 7. My defects are revealed and immediately become shortcomings, which then I desire for the universe to remove, which are removed because my awareness of that desire. You understand? It cycles through it. It's complex, but it's really kind of effective, right? So we have this 7-step prayer with no direction. Who has a big book on their lap? Big book! Would you read me the 3rd step prayer on page 63?
God
Let's all say it together, shall we? God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Wrong. There's no amen. Tricked you. Half of you said amen. Oh, good. Oh, that's a good excuse. That deserves a triple snap if I've ever seen one. So there's no amen on the third step prayer, right? It's a standalone prayer, but there's no amen. Now, I'm a Jew. We have a tradition, we don't say amen to our own prayers, because in Hebrew, actually Aramaic, amen or amen means for me as well. It's what the illiterate masses that were in the temple for the service would say after the law or the prayers were said, in lieu of having them said for them. So we don't say it to our own prayer because it borders the line of polytheism. You might construe it as saying it twice. However, in the Council of Nicaea, and then through the Latin, it became changed, right? Instead of being for me as well, it's what, Charlie?
I agree.
I agree, which then has become to be understood in the Protestant faith as what?
So be it.
So be it. This book, although deeply Eastern in nature, because it cares very little what you believe and very much about what you do, was written by two amazingly Protestant people from Vermont, right? Dr. Bob, a proctologist, and Bill Wilson, a bit of a stock swindler, not the pinnacle of erudition, scholarship, and spiritual enlightenment. Just saying. So if you don't believe in divine intervention, check that, okay? Because Dr. Bob, you can call him a drunken-ass doctor, or you can call him a drunken-ass doctor. You see what I'm saying? Just saying. So, these guys are inherently Protestant, their background, and for them, not saying amen at the end of a prayer literally does not close a prayer. So there may be, again, though divinely inspired, some sort of reasoning behind the fact there's no amen on the third step prayer. Page 76, hit me with the 7-step prayer. You guys know it? My Creator, I am now ready for you to have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen! Can a Hebrew get an amen?
Hallelujah.
I said amen. We don't want hallelujah. Hallelujah's 11-step prayer. All right. So there is no amen on the third step prayer, but there is an amen on the 7-step prayer. Why is that? Why? Why is that, you may ask, Charlie?
2 halves of the same prayer.
2 halves of the same prayer. He just gets that shit by driving in the car with me. It's osmosis, trust me. All right? 2 halves of the same prayer, which mean they represent the same act of contrition or engagement with divinity. Every single step is a contractually binding agreement between you and your higher power. Each has a division of labor, an idea of what should be done. That means 3 and 7 are both about surrender, are they not? And they are the same surrender with a slight difference. If 3 and 7 are one prayer, then they represent 2 separate surrenders of will. The first is the surrender of action. Third step prayer, I surrender my will and my life. My will, what will happen, my fear of the future, and my life, everything that's happened up to now, which is my rumination over the past, my fear, my anxiety, anger, and worry, over to the care of God and let Him handle that so I can be in action. That's easy. Granted, when we first get sober, we struggle with that. I struggled endlessly with that idea. Now, at the time I got, that's the easy part. It's easy for me to throw up my hands and go, you know what, just tell me what to do, dude. I'm totally okay with that shit. Totally. That's the easy part. Surrendering my actions is the easy part. The hard part that I still struggle with on a daily basis, which is why 6 and 7 is a lifetime goal, a lifetime process, is the surrender of trust. The trust that when I throw my hands up and go, fine, just tell me what to do, that shit is going to work out the way it's supposed to. That's the harder surrender. Surrendering the trust that God will do what God's supposed to do, and things are going to work out the way they should. That's a much harder surrender. Listen, I'm sober a minute, and I like God. I'm telling you, me and him, we're homies, for real. But I got to tell you, I still struggle to this day. I trust God, but unfortunately, a lot of times, it's with the shit I trust God with, not everything. You feel me? And that's a problem. I am struggling to this day to trust God with everything. But I can't, because I'm fallible. I'm insecure. I'm still driven by fear and anxiety, even though I know that God will handle those. I don't trust that it'll work out. My predilection is to armchair quarterback the universe every minute of every day. For me, the 7th step is a lifetime. Humility has to come in the form of me knowing that I can wish, hope, and pray all day long, but I can't control shit that I can't control, and I never will, and I need to learn to trust God with everything. And that's the hardest part of step 7 for me. The single most difficult reality. So let's move into the 12 and 12, because that's how I exhibit or attempt to live in humility, is by learning and reminding myself to trust God with everything, every moment of every day. If they're both one prayer, then that means I really have to work on the true nature of surrender. Let's open the 12 and 12. Well, you guys don't have one, so I'll open mine. Except for the teacher's pet, he's always going. Just saying. All right, so humility. What is humility? One of the best, so there's a rule in AA. If you're going to steal some shit from somebody, which we all do, by the way, because there's no such thing as new ideas, and I've mentioned this before, the difference between me now and me 20 years ago when I wasn't sober is I just steal smart shit from smarter people. I used to steal stupid shit from stupid people all the time, and it really didn't work out that well. Now I just steal smart shit from smart people. So, what I'm going to tell you, I stole. Humility, the best definition I've ever heard, excuse me. Did it make noise? No. All right, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. Now, this is hard for me. And the reason is because everything is kind of all about me. That's just kind of how it works. It's kind of how it always works. And even when I'm worrying about what you're thinking, I'm worrying about what you're thinking about me. Correct. Now, couple that with this slight problem that I have, which is half the time, I kind of don't even know what the fuck I'm actually thinking, which means that when I'm trying to figure out what I'm thinking that you're thinking about me when I'm thinking what you're thinking, I don't know shit. X times Y equals 4003. Solve for X and Y. You can't. There's no constant. It's all variables. Which means that if I'm making choices based on what I think you think about me, 90% of the time, 99% of the time, 99.98% of the time, they're going to be wrong. Now, granted, a broken clock's like right twice a day. I'm like a clock with no hand. So it's only right never. What? None today? Yeah, that's going to happen around about 1:45 to never. Okay. Here we go. Since page 70 in the 12 and 12, since this step so specifically concerns itself with humility, we should pause here to consider exactly what the practice of that subject can look like and what it will mean to us. That is a horrible way to open a chapter. Just saying. Because it puts the onus of an expectation that I can never achieve on me immediately. Oh, that's like saying, dude, you know what? I'm like totally a spiritual giant and like the most humble guy you'll ever meet. Like, it's right out the window the minute you say that, right? Indeed, the attainment of greater humility, he goes on to say, is the foundational principle of AA steps, each and every one of them. Right? In essence, what they do is they diminish my ego. In fact, it goes on to say, for without some degree of humility, no alcoholic can stay sober at all. And nearly all AAs have found as well that unless they develop much more of this precious quantity, quality than they may require just for sobriety, they still haven't much of a chance to become truly happy. This is a problem. It's a problem because my entire life was driven at the attainment of pleasure. Every single minute of every single day. Somewhere along the line of my life, probably when I was about, a minute old, I realized that I wanted joy. By the time I was 5 minutes old, I realized that shit took too much work. Whereas pleasure, on the other hand, was super quick and easy. Joy is the desire of every human. But joy requires transcendence of pain and an abundance of work to become enlightened and have an internal change from inside out that reflects the joy of my life. That shit is too slow and too hard. However, drinking tequila and shooting dope in my neck, not slow nor hard. However, by the end of my run, it was also too slow. Because I'm a real alcoholic, which means instant gratification takes too damn long. I want to walk by the bar, look at the bottles, and go, like, no drinking involved, just look at it. Right? Instant gratification is too slow. But what's definitely too slow and too hard is the attainment and the pursuit of joy. But the attainment and pursuit of pleasure is easy. And for me, I made happiness and pleasure synonymous for years and years and years and years. What I've come to learn is that shit, I totally forgot what I was going to say. What I've come to learn, I'm working on it. What I've come to learn is, I don't even know. Thanks for coming. It was a pleasure. So, what I've come to learn is this. No one will sacrifice pleasure to attain pleasure. You won't. I'm an alcoholic. I don't sacrifice pleasure to attain pleasure. I double down and do them both, because that's how I roll. But I will sacrifice pleasure to attain joy. I will put the immediate, visceral, externally stimulated thing away so that I can have an enlightenment. And this is how I practice or try to attain humility, and this is what happens to me in recovery if I do it right. This is the way it works, because I diminish my ego. Ego and humility are diametric opposites. Ego edging God out, right? So let me tell you a little story. Well, by way of an analogy. Who here, show of hands, ever had their tire was like low of air? Not flat, but like low. None of you? Oh, all of you. Oh, go figure. Okay. And you took that tire and you drove it into the Shell station or the Marathon or the BP or the Chevron or the Phillips 76 or the Texaco or whatever particular gas station you like, and you put your quarters in the air thing. But you made sure to read the side because safety first. And it said 42 pounds per square inch max. Who in this room literally put in 44 to 48 pounds? Yeah, that's a lot of you. And the reason is because that's your alcoholic ego. Because it's low. So you know what? I'm going to put in a little bit more just to be safe, right? Because then I won't have to fill it up as much. And see, you're laughing because you've done it before. right? But the truth is when you do that, it makes the hole bigger. You got to do it faster. But that's my alcoholic ego. It is less than. So instead of putting in the proper amount, 42 pounds per square inch, 40, I'm going 52 just to be safe. Which means the hole gets bigger and that shit deflates way faster than it should. That's my ego. But it's not deflated in a way that's healthy. It's deflated in an overcompensatory way. Remember, all my defects, all my shortcomings, all my problems come from fear. Fear exists only in my consciousness. If I have a fear that's existential, it exists here, I overreact to compensate for it, which is a real action which has a value. Fear 0, action 10. Overcompensation, ginormous failure. Story of my life, right? So what I have to do is learn to address humility not in an overcompensatory manner, but in an actual manner, right? And really that comes down to this idea of comfort versus character, right? What does it say on page 72? It says, whenever we had to choose between character and comfort, the character building was lost in the dust of our chase over what we thought was happiness. Wow, that's it, right? I like having good character, but God, I like being drunk a lot better. And trust me, if I could drink to this day with impunity and maintain my spiritual level, I would not be here on a Friday night. You're all lovely people, but shit, I would not be here. Let's be frank. Get it on, get my drink on. Let's do this right. If I could drink with impunity, which means maintain the consistency and growth of a spiritual condition, I would do it. One slight problem. I know, hopefully you do, that we all have spiritual maladies. And the goal of the resolution of that malady is a conscious contact with a higher power. The problem is, I can't even start to have conscious contact with anything if I am unconscious. And when I'm drunk, I'm kind of unconscious. There's that, right? Semi-states or working towards total unconsciousness. That's my goal. So how can I have a conscious contact with any... Shit, I've watched the same movie 40 times when I was drunk, which means I didn't have a conscious contact with my television. You're like, I don't remember that. Well, yeah, you were shit-faced when you watched it last. Oh, yeah. That's the people having a conversation in my head. So, yeah, I need to do that. And what I have to understand is that as long as I place self-reliance first, which is thinking that I can muscle a consciousness and humility, which is always an overcompensation, because if I try to make it myself without being placed into a humbling position, then a genuine reliance on that higher power, trusting God with everything, not just the things I trust God with, is out of the question. Genuine reliance on a higher power is out of the question. There is only room for one God in my brain. Unfortunately, the majority of my life, it was me. Hopefully now it's not as much. Now, granted, there's still some very strange people live in my head, and they have interesting conversations. But they've also had more people that are the voice of reason that have taken up residence, right? It then says the process of gaining a new perspective is unbelievably painful. This is the idea. Step 7 is about this concept. The concept is, I will only change when the pain of being the same becomes worse than my fear of being different. Right? That's the way it's always been in my life. The tension of reality and existence colliding create a pain of tension that allows me to transcend. This is a beautiful concept, and it's one that's echoed by Dr. Bob, kind of my favorite guy. And as Bill sees it, I think it's page 48, maybe page 52. Dr. Bob is quoted in a thing that's called commiseration. He says, I used to commiserate with all those who suffered. Now I only feel bad for those who suffer in ignorance, who do not know the purpose and ultimate utility of pain. My goal to be humble is what I want to do is get to the place where I can be grateful for the pain, because the pain is a guarantee of a future enlightenment. And I get glimpses of that shit in my life. But I'm not there 100% yet. But boy, do I want to be. I really, really do. You know? I mentioned this 2 weeks ago. I tell people all the time that I don't really have problems. Listen, my mother-in-law died. I had a crazy shit show in Texas, but I met a dude named Dusty Piles. Like, how is that a bad thing? We went to a meeting. My wife's ill, waiting on a transplant. Don't know what's going to happen, but I don't have problems. I have things that arise in my life. And I look for the solution in my sponsor, the guys I sponsor, my spiritual advisor, my friends, my family. I take that suggestion, I live in the solution. If there's no solution, understand this. That shit is not my problem. It's God's. Right? But then, again, that it's predicated on me trusting God with everything, not just the things I want to trust God with. So I have to continually work to develop that. Page 73, it says, we first see humility as a necessity. You had a question?
No.
You just waving at somebody?
Yeah.
Hey!
Hi.
We first see humility as a necessity. I gotta do it or I die, right? But then we see it differently. We see it as a discipline for me to get better. I'm willing to accept the discipline to transcend from the place that is painful more than the... What am I, sweating? What? Are you laughing at me? You're hurting my feelings. All right, so now we move into a place of discipline where I'm willing to accept that discipline to be better, even though it's hard. What did it just say on the page before? It is genuinely painful to experience that type of internal change. But then I move into the different place. All right, it's kind of like similar to going to meetings. I go to meetings in the first place because they make me. Then I go because I have to. Then I go because I like to. Then I go because I want to. And you know when I can stop going? When I don't want to. That's when I can stop going. I had a guy ask me, how many meetings is enough? I said, well, why don't you start diminishing your meetings until you drink and then add one. It's a solid plan, right? All right. It's a good plan. I mean, for me, it's a good plan. For him, not so much. Right? Then I start to move into humility as the spiritual plan for my life. How does that work? Well, on page 74, let me turn the page. There's all kinds of highlighted stuff in my book. It's hard to tell. Until now, our lives have been largely devoted to running from pain and problems. Right? We fled from them as from a plague. We never wanted to deal with the fact of suffering. Escape via the bottle was always our solution. Character building through suffering might have been all right for saints, but I think it says. That's not what it says, but it certainly didn't appeal to me. I do think it says. Everywhere we saw failure and misery become transformed by humility into priceless assets that were spiritual growth. That's awesome. That is awesome. I used to take my God. I used to take my problems to God. Now I take God to problems. That way I don't even cut out the middleman. I don't even got to carry that shit. Just boom, here you go. It's yours. It's not mine, right? And that's the beauty. Because Dr. Bob has that understanding, right? He talks about it at length. He says, in As Bill Sees It, it's directly out of Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. He says, the best idea I've ever heard about describing Alcoholics Anonymous and spiritual growth. He says, AA is no success story in the ordinary sense of the word. Which means it's extraordinary if it's not ordinary. And then he tells us what it is. He says it is suffering transmuted under grace into spiritual progress. That means my choice to stay in pain is changed to the recognition that pain is my motivator to become a better man. That happens without jolting halts, but smoothly and continuous, graceful like a dancer. And that itself is the spiritual progress that I relish. The best example of that transition of the way my life is, seeing the pain of my life, because I can use that pain to transcend, to pursue joy and come out the other end on joy, is countered by my favorite description of active suffering in alcoholism, which is by Marty Mann, who was the first woman to stay sober her entire life in Alcoholics Anonymous, and also became the head of the National Council on Alcoholism at the urging of Bill and Bob by violating her own anonymity. And her story is in the first 100. It's called Women Suffer Too. On page 204, she writes the best description of alcoholic suffering I've ever heard in my life. Headstrong and willful, I rushed from pleasure to pleasure and found the returns diminishing to the vanishing points. All that pursuit and nothing to show. Now I relish it and welcome the pain in the hopes that I can be spiritual enough to see that there's growth on the other end. Thanks for letting me share. It's a lot of clapping, just. Nah. Am I supposed to say something now?